The ardent vigil drifted through the void, an Imperial Navy vessel proud in its purpose, but now reduced to a hollow, dying husk. Within its labyrinthine corridors, lit only by flickering lumens, the air grew heavy with rot and despair. Dr. Thalassa Vreln, apothecary medicae to the ship's complement, sat hunched over her desk in the infirmary, her trembling hand scratching out another grim entry in her journal. Her surgical gloves, once pristine white, were now discoloured with gore and ichor. The weight of failure pressed upon her shoulders like iron chains.
30th day aboard the Ardent Vigil. The malady continues to spread unchecked. My remedies, poultices, bloodletting, even the most sacred unguents blessed by the ecclesiarchy have done naught to stem its advance. Symptoms appear faster than I can document, and the dead, Emperor preserve us, the dead do not rest.
She glanced over her shoulder at the medical bay, row upon row of cots stretched into the gloom, each bearing a shrouded figure in various stages of corruption. The once sterile chamber had become a charnel house. Miasmatic vapours hung in the air, causing her to cough into a cloth she always carried now, though even that no longer offered much relief. In the corner of the infirmary, Medicae Unit IX-88 hovered silently, its mechanical arms still and retracted. The Medicae servitor was ancient and decrepit, a relic barely capable of its duties. It had once been a chirurgeon's assistant, equipped with delicate manipulators and diagnostic augers, but centuries of use had left its mechanism sluggish and prone to malfunction. Its vocal unit crackled faintly, emitting an occasional, unintelligible mutter.
Data insufficient. Analyze. Recalculate.
It whispered, its monotone voice blending with the hum of failing air recyclers. Thalassa ignored it, as she had done for days. The servitor's usefulness had ended when the disease defied even the most sophisticated treatments its databanks could provide. Behind thick curtains lay the most advanced cases, isolated not for their safety, but for hers. These patients had progressed beyond any semblance of humanity. Even as the physician trained in the grim sciences of the Imperium, she could not reconcile what she saw with natural order. The disease had begun innocently enough. 2 weeks ago, Deccan Tal had reported to her with an inflamed throat and a mild fever. Such maladies were common aboard a ship where hygiene often succumbed to the exigencies of war. By the 3rd day, Tal's condition worsened. Pustules bloomed along his neck and chest. Their surfaces glistened with a viscous yellow fluid. His breathing grew ragged, punctuated by wet, hacking coughs. By the end of the week, he had been joined by 3 others, all showing similar symptoms. When the pustules ruptured, spraying foul-smelling ichor that hissed as it struck metal surfaces, Dr. Vreln ordered quarantine protocols, but it was already too late. 36th day. The disease spread with terrifying efficiency. Dozens fell ill each day, their conditions spiraling into grotesque deformities. The Medicae staff, herself included, worked ceaselessly to stem the tide, but they were few and the patients were many. Worse still, whispers of strange occurrences began to circulate among the crew.
Servitor says bodies are moving. I heard it reporting something impossible. Could be a fault in its Vox systems.
Her chirurgeon's assistant, Cameron, had murmured one evening, his voice trembling as he glanced at IX-88.
Superstitious nonsense,
Thalassa snapped, though her servitor's quiet mutterings had grown more frequent. She told herself it was simply malfunctioning, but then she saw it. It was past the hour of the ship's rest cycle. The infirmary was quieter than usual. Most patients had lost the strength to scream. She had stepped away to her quarters to fetch her journal. As she passed the makeshift morgue, a storage bay repurposed for the dead, she heard a faint, wet sound. Her heart quickened. Gripping her auspex, she opened the door. The smell hit her first, thick and putrid, a stench far worse than that of ordinary decay. The lumens flickered feebly, casting long shadows over the rows of body wrapped in linen. And then, one of them moved. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It began with a faint twitch, then a convulsion as the body's abdomen heaved upwards. The linen tore as something pushed through, a glistening, misshapen growth. A moment later, the corpse let out a low, gurgling moan. Thalassa staggered back, nearly dropping her auspex. The corpse turned its head towards her, its jaw unhinging to reveal a writhing mass of maggots and flesh.
Analyzing.
The servitor whispered from behind her, its optics whirring.
Life signs detected. Corruption index anomalous.
By the 40th day, the ardent vigil was barely functional. The disease had claimed the majority of the crew, leaving the corridors eerily empty. Those who still lived avoided one another, their fear of contagion stronger than that of camaraderie. The ship's engines sputtered intermittently, and the air recyclers struggled to combat the miasma permeating every deck. The servitor had become an unwelcome presence, its mutterings like an accusatory shadow. It reported what she already knew.
Unidentified pathogen. Quarantine reached. Total containment failure.
Dr. Vreln spent her waking hours in the infirmary, tending to the few patients who hadn't yet progressed into monstrosity. Her assistant, Cambron, had succumbed days ago, leaving her alone, save for IX-88. She rationed her supplies with the precision of a battlefield surgeon, though she knew in her heart it was futile. She was performing an autopsy on one of her latest victims, a young engineer whose death had been particularly gruesome. His chest cavity was riddled with cysts, some as large as fists, and his lungs were fused together by a fibrous growth she couldn't identify. As she made the first incision, a burst of gas escaped, carrying with it a cacophony of whispers. She staggered back, clutching her ears. The voices were faint but unmistakable, murmuring blasphemies in a language she didn't recognize.
You cannot save them.
The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. She spun around, scalpel in hand, but the infirmary was empty save for the corpses.
You cannot save yourself, dear Thalassa.
It continued, dripping with mockery.
Why do you struggle so? Grandfather is already here.
Her knees buckled. She tried to cry out, to summon what little authority she had left, but her voice faltered. She realized then that the laughter, the maddening laughter she had heard in the distance, was growing louder. _____. 43rd day. The final stages of the plague were beyond horror. Patients' bodies were twisted and bloated, their limbs sprouting grotesque appendages or fusing into useless stumps. Their faces collapsed inward, leaving only gaping maws that exhaled noxious fumes. Those who could still move wandered aimlessly, muttering praises to an unseen grandfather. Thalassa barricaded herself in the infirmary, but it offered little solace. The walls were damp with slime, and the air was thick with buzzing flies. Her Auspex, once a reliable tool, now displayed erratic readings, heat signatures where there should be none, whispers emanating from inert objects. She spent hours poring over her journal, searching for some clue she might have missed, some connection she had failed to make. But every line, every observation led her back to the same grim conclusion. This was no natural disease. This was
corruption.
The word came unbidden, spoken aloud before she could stop herself. She knew what it meant, though she dared not think it. And then the laughter returned. It filled the room, deafening and pervasive, as if the very air was mocking her. She clutched her ears, tears streaming down her face.
Enough! Who are you? What do you want?
The laughter subsided, replaced by a voice so deep and resonant it seemed to vibrate within her bones.
I am generosity. I am love. I am the salvation you seek. Dear child, Grandfather Nurgle has watched your struggle, and he is most pleased.
Her stomach churned. She knew the name, but hearing it spoken aloud was like a physical blow. She backed away, her eyes darting around the room.
You lie! I am a servant of the Emperor. I will not obey.
The voice interrupted her with a chuckle.
Oh, my dear. You already serve. Every moment you have spent tending to my garden has been a hymn of devotion. Do you not see your compassion? They have nurtured my blessings, and now it is time for you to join the harvest.
Her knees buckled as a wave of nausea rolled over her. Her stomach twisted, not with fear, but with something far worse, something alive.
No, this can't be real. This isn't real. This can't be real.
A sharp pain lanced through her body, forcing her to her knees. Her hands trembled as she lifted them, only to see her gloves splitting apart, her flesh swelling with unnatural growths. Blackened veins crawled across her skin, pulsating as they carried more than blood.
You fought so valiantly, my dear.
The voice continued, now dripping with cruel delight.
But your devotion has not gone unnoticed. You will make such a fine addition to the family.
The sound of grinding servos drew her attention to the corner of the room. The infirmary servitor, once an emotionless machine of flesh and steel, lurched into motion, its eyes glassy and empty, focused on her.
Medicate Thalassa.
It intoned, its voice a monotone rasp.
Query. Why do you resist the embrace? Data suggests resistance is futile. Observation. You have always been so tender to your patients. This is why we love you.
She froze, heart hammering as IX-88's voice took on an eerie, lifting quality.
Do you hear them, Doctor? They call for you. They need you. We all need you. Stay with us. Stay forever.
The machine's faceplate twitched, its expressionless visage somehow managing to convey an unnatural glee.
New directive. Deliver you unto Grandfather. Initiating care protocol for eternity.
The servitor's arms unfolded, its syringes and saws gleaming in the dim light, dripping with fluids that hissed as they hit the floor. Thalassa stumbled backwards, the scalpel trembling in her hand.
Error. Fear detected.
The servitor droned, advancing on her.
Fear is unnecessary. This is a mercy. This is love. Grandfather will take the pain away.
Thalassa screamed, slashing wildly at the machine as it lunged towards her. Its voice did not falter, even as sparks flew from its damaged frame.
I see you, Doctor.
It crooned, its voice layered with a chorus of whispers.
I see what you've become, and it's beautiful.
The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her panicked heartbeat, and as IX-88's shadow stretched across the room, its voice changed one final time.
Welcome home.
She turned towards the quarantine curtains, hoping to escape the madness. Her eyes fell on Sister Mariner Alicia, the most advanced patient in her care. Alicia had once been a proud, capable soldier, but now she lay on a steel cot, her body unrecognizable, swollen and misshapen, covered in boils that oozed thick, yellow ichor. Her once braided hair hung in filthy clumps, and her eyes were clouded with a pale, milky film. Alicia's chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths, her mouth half open in a grotesque parody of speech. Thalassa's heart wrenched as she stepped towards her, desperate for any semblance of the woman who had once been her sister in arms.
Doctor.
Alicia croaked, her voice a wet, gurgling rasp.
Help me. He is coming.
Thalassa's breath hitched. She stepped back, her eyes flicking to the scalpel in her hand. She could end this. She could end her. But before she could act, Alicia's body convulsed violently. Her chest split open like a ripened fruit, and from within emerged a writhing, postulant mass. It coiled upwards, a sickly green light emanating from its core. The thing resembled no organism Thalassa had ever seen. Part flesh, part rot, and entirely wrong. As it rose, Alicia's body collapsed into a pile of sludge. Her last words a faint whisper carried on the foul air.
He watches.
Thalassa ran. The corridors of the Ardent Vigil had become a nightmare. Bulkheads oozed with slime, and the ship groaned as if it too were alive and in agony. Shadows moved where there should be none, and the laughter, oh, the laughter, echoed with every corner, taunting her, guiding her deeper into despair. She stumbled into the command deck, hoping to find someone, anyone who still lived. But the scene that greeted her was far worse than she could have imagined. The officers, once stalwart servants of the Emperor, were now bloated monstrosities. Captain Varus sat slumped in his throne, his body a grotesque parody of authority. His uniform had fused with his flesh, and his bloated hands clenched at the armrests as if in mockery of command. His eyes, clouded and weeping pus, turned to her as she entered.
Doctor,
he rasped with a voice thick with rot.
welcome to the feast.
The others turned to face her, their faces twisted into leering grins. Some of them still bore remnants of their human forms, an eye here, a patch of unblemished skin there, but these only served to heighten the horror of their transformations.
You've done well.
Varus continued, his tone almost fatherly.
You've tended to the flock with such care. Grandfather is pleased.
I serve the Emperor!
Thalassa screamed, her voice breaking.
The Emperor.
Varus chuckled, a deep, wet sound.
And where is he now? Did he answer your prayers? Did he stem the tide? No, Doctor. It was Grandfather who provided. Grandfather who embraced us when your Emperor abandoned us.
She raised the scalpel, her hands shaking.
Stay back!
Varus laughed again, a sound that echoed with malice and pity.
You still think you're separate from us, don't you? Look at yourself, Thalassa. Look at what you've become.
Her breath caught. She glanced down at her arms, and for the first time she recognized the extent of her own corruption. Her skin was mottled and discolored, her veins bulging and black. Her fingers had begun to elongate, the nails curving into claws.
No!
She whispered, dropping the scalpel.
Oh, no! This isn't real!
Oh, but it is.
Varys said, rising from his throne with a grotesque squelch.
Embrace it, Doctor. Join us in his eternal garden.
She fled once more, her mind a whirlwind of fear and denial. The ship seemed to shift around her, its corridors narrowing and twisting as if to trap her. She could feel the corruption spreading within her, her body rebelling against her with every step. Eventually, she collapsed in the chapel, the last place aboard the ship that still bore the Emperor's sigils. She crawled to the altar, her vision swimming, and reached the aquila carved into its surface.
Emperor!
She sobbed.
Please, help me. Save me from this. From him.
For a moment there was silence. And then came the voice.
Oh, my dear Thalassa.
It crooned.
Your Emperor isn't listening, but I am.
The shadows coalesced around her, forming a hulking figure that reeked of rot and decay. It loomed over her, its bloated form adorned with sores and crawling with flies. Its face, or what passed for a face, split into a grotesque grin.
Grandfather Nurgle welcomes you, child.
It said,
Come, let me ease your suffering.
She tried to scream, but the sound was lost as the thing enveloped her, her body convulsed, her flesh warping and splitting as the corruption consumed her. And then she felt it, an eruption of heat and wetness from her abdomen. She looked down, horrified, to see her stomach distending, bulging grotesquely as if something inside her was growing, pulsing. Her skin split like overripe fruit, and from the fissures emerged writhing tendrils, coated in slick mucus and pustules that oozed with each movement. Her stomach spasmed, the force of it doubling her over, and she collapsed forward into the filth-coated floor, gasping for breath. The writhing mass within her twisted with such force that she thought her very organs might tear free from her body.
Do you feel it?
The voice whispered, its tone thick with a sensual, almost affectionate cruelty.
It is a gift, Thalassa. A blessing. You are becoming whole.
She groaned in agony, her hands clutching at her bloated stomach. Her once pristine medical robes were now stained, ripped, and soaked with blood. Her breath came in ragged gasps. And each exhalation was filled with the rank smell of death. The final sound that broke through the fog of her pain was the hissing of something vile and slick, rising from the altar. The last thing she saw before her vision faded was the corpse of Sister Mariner Alicia crawling into the chapel, her shattered face twisting into a grin. The smell of rot filled the room as the body dragged itself towards her with unnatural speed. The filth that had once been her flesh, now nothing but a mass of ruptured boils and wriggling tendrils. Behind her, the shadows coalesced into a vast, rotting presence, its corpulent form adorned with lesions that wept a yellow ichor. Its voice boomed yet whispered at once.
Behold, my dear. You are reborn in the glorious decay of Grandfather Nurgle.
Alicia's grotesque smile stretched impossibly wide, her maggot-filled mouth opening to reveal a voice that gurgled as if from deep within the bowels of the grave.
We are waiting for you.
As the laughter consumed her mind, she welcomed the darkness.
Recording archived. Data entry subscript. The Miasma of Despair. User engagement protocols activated. Input required. Initiate like. Execute subscribe. Or vocalize commendation in the commentary channel. Compliance increases algorithmic reach. Thank you for watching. Grandfather protects.